Thank you very much. Just a couple of minutes then opening for questions because we're going to be pushed for time now. I'd just like to start the question, if that's okay, to Carolyn and Heather. I've got two questions. The first question is, in Shropshire Council, we've already seen a decrease in about 15% of our staff, with the intention to reduce that by 50 to 70% over the next 2 or 3 years. I just wondered, in your experience, whether or not that was a similar pattern amongst other similar authorities, and also what effect you think that will have on the local services provided in Shropshire. And the other question is, do you think it is going to be realistic to have above a 1% pay increase? So 3 questions, really.
Do you want me to go first?
That would be great, Carolyn, thank you.
Well, I think from the presentation I just did, in terms of the level of reductions you have had to date, they are pretty well in line nationally with that 15% reduction. A 50 to 70% reduction in staffing levels going forward, presumably non-teaching.
Yes.
Yeah. I can't really comment, to be absolutely honest. I'm certainly not aware of that level of figure that I've heard of. And I think it comes back to the wider point that both Heather and myself made, is if a council, I mean, they are democratically elected and the electorate can choose what to do in terms of the decisions that members make. But if a council decides that that's what it wants to do, I think there does need to be that conversation with the public about what the public expect. Because, you are democratically elected, you can reduce services. There is an issue about statutory levels of service provision. But it's very important that the public understand what is going to happen to the services that are made. And I think that is a key issue for all councils, not just Shropshire Council, going forward. Is the 1%, anything more than 1%, realistic? Well, as I say, it depends on what happens with the national minimum wage to a certain extent.
I can't tell you, sorry. I know, but I can't tell you.
Yeah, no. So my general view is that every council is grappling with the issue. I don't think any council wants to continue to freeze pay, frankly, going forward. I just don't think it's, it's been long enough now. The private sector are not getting pay freezes anymore. And actually the public sector, the low paid are the public sector. So when people talk about the cost of living crisis, it is people who work in public services who are impacted. So I don't think anybody wants to do it. But just go back to those figures that I raised, which is a £2.2 billion mismatch between the level of service and the level of funding that is. If you increase the pay bill by the current amount that's been requested, that would push that up to over 3 billion. So actually, I think the 1% that the government has imposed is obviously what they feel is reasonable. But I think it's really difficult, and some councils are as interested in retaining employment as they are, given that they're a huge employer in their local economy, as they are in the issue of pay as well. So it's a really, really difficult issue. If you were asking me personally, I think it's unrealistic. I'm not saying that's an LGA view, that's a personal view.
Heather, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I think you've had a 15% cut in staff. We've been doing some work with some of our branches in the northwest, actually, to really drill down and find out what's been happening to jobs. And since the coalition came in Manchester and Sefton and Salford, 30% of jobs have gone. They haven't all, that's a combination of compulsory redundancies, voluntary redundancies, the deletion of frozen posts, which often isn't counted in the equation, and outsourcing, which we've counted as loss of jobs to the local authority, although not to the local economy. So some places have been very badly hit, and it's kind of been disguised because it's not a head-on assault on jobs, but when you add it up, that's what's happened. I don't know of anywhere else that's planning the level of job cuts that you've talked about. I mean, that seems like madness, and obviously how that matches up with delivering statutory services, let alone anything else, I don't know. And it does, I was talking to Lou earlier before the meeting, and it does sound like there have been some daft things happening, like redundancies amongst school meals workers, and then when asked, the leader of the council, when asked who was going to deliver school meals, said, well, someone will step in and do it. Well, either it's not a redundancy and they're going to re-employ someone else, or they're going to try and get volunteers, and that will be very interesting, won't it? So we'll see. The 1% pay increase, I'm not daft or naive, and I know that reserves cannot be used in their entirety for pay increases. But what has happened, in my view, is that councils over the last few years have made a political choice about what they do with money, and reserves have increased by well over 2 billion in the last couple of years. That's about 9% of the pay, about 11% of the pay bill or something. And I think that political choices have been made about what happens to money that have overlooked the fact that paying conditions in local government have deteriorated so badly. And I think that's unacceptable. I think the other dimension to all of this that's been overlooked is the knock-on effect on local economies of improving local government pay. Because outside of London, about 60% of local government workers live in the authority they work in. And the local economic, but the macroeconomic impact of increasing local government pay is a really important argument. And there's also the research I told you about, which shows that the take by central government would increase to the point where over half the cost was met through increased taxation and national insurance. So I don't think local government workers can take another below inflation pay increase, because if you do, by next year your pay will have fallen by 20%, and then what happens the year after that? You'll soon have lost a quarter of your earnings in real terms, and I don't think that can continue to happen. And there is a very clear issue about what's going to happen to the minimum wage and local government pay. Local government should not be a minimum wage employer.
Thanks. Any other questions? What, Lou, yes?
Yes, just Carolyn touched on using reserves for housing, but according to the press, Shropshire have already used £19 million of their reserves for pay redundancies.
Well, that's not a question, that's just in terms of the use of resources. So that's patchy as well across the country, and some councils have got a significant amount of unallocated reserves, and they are in areas of considerable housing growth. And there could be a match. One of the things that we would really like to do is actually get the local government community not just using its own reserves in its own area, but actually using some of those reserves to generate growth in other parts of the country and get a return on that back into the individual council who's lending money rather than a bank, so that you're actually using your reserves to generate income to yourselves, but actually for the good of housing growth elsewhere. And if they did do that and houses were built, then that gets your council tax income in as well. So that's what I was meaning in terms of use of reserves. I mean, many councils use reserves, and in fact, you know, Heather just said that council reserves have gone up considerably over the last couple of years, and indeed they have. The reason for that is some councils actually specifically increase their reserves to pay for downsizing and therefore redundancies. And additionally, councils will be generating their savings early in some instances because they are good at managing reductions. So actually they generate that early. And as I said earlier, some councils are in not the same position financially as others.
Right, one more question then before the raffle. Then we're going to have to go for dinner. Thanks. Yes, Viv. Thank you.
You've seen some councils go bankrupt. Do you believe that some will go bankrupt in this country?
No, because it's against the law. And councillors would effectively be put in prison if they didn't set a legal budget. That doesn't mean that I don't think that some councillors are in really serious financial difficulty. And that comes down to the issue of the level of statutory service provision that they provide and whether they are meeting their statutory responsibilities. And secondly, whether they are able to continue to provide the level of discretionary service that they currently provide. And I think that that's where it will go, as opposed to whether they go bankrupt or not.
Thank you. Thank you very much again to Carolyn and Heather for braving the journey. So thank you very much. Go and have a lovely lunch.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you all.